There are moments in life when the past does not knock politely. It does not announce itself with warning or mercy. It returns quietly, wearing a familiar face, standing in a doorway, waiting to be recognized. For Duke Alistair Vane, master of Ravenhurst Estate, the past had been buried for 30 years, sealed beneath power, discipline, and a life built so carefully that nothing unexpected was ever allowed to exist within it. He had wealth, he had status, he had control. And in the vast, echoing halls of his estate, he had something else as well: silence. A silence so complete it had become part of him. He believed it would remain that way forever. Until the morning a young woman arrived at his gates. She came with nothing but quiet dignity, steady eyes, and a name that meant nothing to him. Or so he thought, because the truth was far more dangerous than either of them could imagine. She was not just a servant seeking work. She was not just another passing presence in a house that had seen many come and go. She was the one thing he had spent his entire life running from, and the one truth that refused to stay buried. This is a story of power, of silence, of choices made in fear, and of a daughter who unknowingly walked into the house of the man who had abandoned her before she was even born. A story where love was denied, where betrayal was quiet, and where time did not heal. It waited. Now, let us go back to the beginning and show you everything. Drop a comment right now. Tell us where you are watching from. What time is it where you are? London, New York, Toronto, Sydney? We want to know how far this story has traveled. If this is your first time here, welcome home. Hit subscribe now.
Ravenhurst Estate sat in the quiet dignity of the English countryside like a man who has spent his entire life being certain of his position. Iron gates, ancient oaks, rolling green fields stretching beyond the boundary walls in every direction. The house itself was vast and immaculate, every corridor gleaming, every surface exact, every detail aligned with the standards of a man who had built his life around precision and had never once questioned whether precision was the same thing as living. Duke Alistair Vane was 61 years old. He had the bearing of a man carved by discipline, tall, silver-haired, composed to the point of stillness. His reputation in high society was one of absolute authority, the kind of authority that does not announce itself because it does not need to. He moved through Ravenhurst the way he moved through everything, exactly, without waste, without warmth that had not been earned through a process he controlled entirely. Ravenhurst was perfect, and perfectly silent. For 5 years that silence had been managed by Mrs. Bryony Hale, his housekeeper. She ran the estate with quiet excellence and left one morning with her hands folded and a small proud smile to tell him she was entering a caregiving training program, something she had long desired, a life of greater purpose. He respected her for it. He also needed a replacement immediately. "I have someone in mind," Bryony said. "A young woman of good character, quiet and diligent, in need of stable employment." Alistair trusted Bryony completely. He agreed without hesitation. He could not have imagined what she was about to bring through his door. Across the town, in modest lodgings that had never known luxury, Miss Elowen Vale was preparing for the meeting that would change her life. She was 22 years old, quietly composed in the way of a person who has learned composure, not from privilege, but from necessity. She had her mother's dark eyes and her mother's particular way of holding herself, straight-backed and steady, in a manner that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with the simple decision to remain upright, regardless of what the world was doing around her. Her mother, Seraphine Vale, had been a seamstress, a woman of quiet dignity who had raised her daughter alone on resilience and love and the careful management of very limited means. Their home had been small, warm despite its smallness, full of the particular richness that comes from two people who have only each other and have decided that is enough. There had always been one absence, her father. Elowyn had asked once. She was 7 years old and had noticed what other children had that she did not, and had finally put the question into words. Seraphine had paused with her needle still in her hand. His name was Alastair, she said, her voice carefully stripped of everything except the information, and he chose not to stay. It was never spoken of again. Elowyn had buried the question the way she buried everything, quietly, thoroughly, in a place she did not visit because visiting it served no practical purpose. When illness took Seraphine swiftly, Elowyn was 16 and her mother was gone in the time it takes for a life to simply stop. The question resurfaced briefly. She looked at it, she put it back down. She arranged the funeral and sorted the lodgings and found work and kept going, because there was nobody else to keep going, and stopping was not available to her. When Mrs. Hale offered her a position at a noble estate, she accepted without hesitation. Stability, purpose, a step into a world she had only ever observed from a distance. She did not know she was stepping into her past. She packed her things on a Monday morning in October. She straightened her coat. She walked to Ravenhurst. The first moment Elowyn entered the estate, something shifted. Not dramatically, not with any specific incident, simply a quality in the air of the place that felt, for a reason she could not identify and did not examine, familiar in a way that unfamiliar places are not supposed to feel. Then she met the Duke. He was standing in the entrance hall when Mrs. Hale brought her in, tall and silver-haired and composed to the point of stillness. He looked at her with the assessing eyes of a man who evaluates everything that enters his house. When their eyes met, something passed between them, a strange, fleeting recognition that neither could name. To Alastair, it felt like a distant memory brushing against his mind. To Elowyn, it felt like standing before something she should know without being able to say why. Neither spoke of it. He showed her the standards expected. She confirmed she understood them. She began the following morning. She was good at the work, better than good. She learned the rhythms of Ravenhurst with the speed of someone who has been managing a household since she was 15 and finds the work itself straightforward. Every corridor gleaming, every meal precise, every detail aligned. The Duke found himself watching her occasionally, briefly, subtly, drawn by something he could not name and did not pursue. Neither of them knew yet what was coming. Lord Crispin Darlow arrived on a Thursday. Lord Crispin Darlow was everything Alastair Vane was not. Loud, expressive, unburdened by restraint. He filled rooms with laughter and spoke without filter and carried the past like an open book. He arrived at Ravenhurst on a Thursday, and by Friday luncheon he had said the thing that cracked everything open. Not deliberately, simply because Crispin Darlow had never learned the particular discipline of leaving certain things unsaid.
Elowyn stood in the kitchen after the luncheon and did not move for a long time. The other staff moved around her, plates coming back from the dining room, the cook working at the range, the ordinary sounds of a household continuing its ordinary business, completely unaware that something had just happened in the dining room that was not ordinary at all. Elowyn stood at the counter with both hands flat on the surface. She was thinking. Not emotionally, not yet. She was doing what she always did with large things, processing them methodically before allowing herself to feel them, taking the information apart and examining each piece separately. What Crispin had said, running off after she told you she was carrying your child. Her mother's name had been Seraphine. Her father's name had been Alastair. The Duke's name was Alastair. The Duke had looked at her in that first moment in the entrance hall with an expression she had not been able to name, the recognition of something he should know, something pressing against the edges of his memory. She looked at her hands on the counter. She breathed carefully. Then she went back to the dining room to clear the next course. That night, Ravenhurst was quiet in a way that felt different from its usual quiet. Alastair sat in his private study for a long time without lighting the lamp. He sat in the dark with Crispin's words moving through him, and the face of the young woman who had been standing 3 feet away when those words were spoken, moving through him, and the particular feeling of a truth he had buried for 30 years, pressing up through the ground he had buried it under. He had been 28 years old. Seraphine Vale had been 20, a seamstress's daughter, dark-eyed and quietly intelligent, and possessed of a dignity that had nothing to do with her position. He had known her for 7 months. It had been, he forced himself to use the accurate word, significant. Not a casual arrangement, something real that he had chosen to abandon because he was the heir to Ravenhurst, and the world he had been raised in did not accommodate a seamstress's daughter, regardless of what he felt about her. When she had told him she was carrying his child, he had panicked. He had left. Not immediately, not dramatically. He had simply, over the following weeks, removed himself, reduced contact, invented obligations, made himself unavailable in the particular cowardly way that does not require a confrontation because it never produces one. He had told himself she would manage. He had told himself she would be fine. He had never checked. He rose from the chair and took the lamp and went to the storage room at the end of the east corridor, a room he had not entered in decades. He found the box he was looking for on the 3rd shelf, dusty, undisturbed. Inside, remnants of a different life, letters he had not opened, including one in handwriting he recognized immediately. Seraphine. He sat on the floor of the storage room with the letter in his hands and felt the particular weight of a man reading something he should have read 30 years ago. The truth had found him. It had walked through his front door on a Monday morning in October with dark eyes and a straight-backed composure that he recognized now with complete clarity. His mother's posture, Seraphine's eyes, his own silence in the bones of her face. The following morning, he requested Elowen's official documents under the pretense of formalizing her employment. When he saw the name Seraphine Vale on her birth record, the last possibility of doubt closed. Elowen was his daughter. Elowen found the portrait on a Wednesday afternoon. She was cleaning the Duke's private study, a task she performed weekly with the precise care the room required, when she moved a stack of documents on the corner shelf and found it. A small framed portrait. 3 young figures, a summer setting, informal in the way that portraits are informal when they are not commissioned but simply captured. She looked at the first figure. Crispin, younger but unmistakable. She looked at the second. A young man, dark-haired, before the silver, before the years had carved his face into what it was now, but the eyes were the same, the posture was the same. Alastair. She looked at the third figure, her mother. Seraphine Vale, at perhaps 20 years old, dark-eyed and quietly composed, and entirely herself in the image, standing beside the young man who would become the Duke of Ravenhurst with the particular ease of someone who does not yet know what is coming. Elowen looked at the portrait for a long time. Everything aligned. The truth was no longer a question. She replaced the portrait exactly where she had found it. She finished cleaning the study. She went to make the Duke's afternoon tea. She carried it to the study on the correct tray with the correct arrangement and set it before him and straightened and looked at him directly for the first time since the luncheon. He looked back at her. They looked at each other across the desk of Ravenhurst with the portrait on the shelf between them and 30 years of silence filling every inch of the room. "Will that be all, Your Grace?" Elowen said. "No," "It will not," Alistair said quietly. They both were carrying the same truth. He had known it for 3 days. She had known it for 2. Neither had spoken it. The particular discipline of a man who had spent 61 years controlling everything he said was about to meet the particular composure of a woman who had spent 22 years burying the one question she most needed answered. Something was going to have to give. It was going to be him.
Alistair told her everything. He did not prepare a version of events. He did not arrange the facts in a way that distributed the weight of them more favorably. He simply told the truth from beginning to end in the direct, organized manner of a man who has decided that honesty is the only thing left available to him. He told her about Seraphine, about the 7 months, about what it had been and what he had chosen to do with it when it became inconvenient. He told her about the letter he had not opened for 30 years sitting on the shelf in the storage room. He told her that he had received documents confirming what he already knew and that she had a right to that confirmation directly from him rather than from paperwork. He told her he was sorry, not as a performance, not as a man seeking absolution, as a man stating a fact that he understood was insufficient, but that was true regardless of its insufficiency. Elowen sat across from him and listened to all of it. She sat completely still in the chair on the other side of his desk, in the posture she had inherited from a woman he had abandoned 30 years ago, and she listened without interrupting and without expression, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. She spoke about her mother, not about what his abandonment had done to her mother, because she had not been present for most of it and would not speculate. She spoke about who her mother had been, the seamstress working by lamplight after Elowen was asleep, the specific way Seraphine had of making small things feel like enough, the dignity she had carried, not as performance, but as genuine quality of character. The morning she had been fine, and the evening she had not been, and the 3 weeks after that, and then nothing. She spoke about growing up with an absence she had not been given the language to name until she was old enough to find the language herself. She spoke calmly, but every word carried the weight of everything it described. "You chose not to know," she said finally. He did not defend himself. "Yes," he said, "I did." The study was very quiet. Outside Ravenshurst, the English countryside continued in the particular indifferent beauty of a landscape that does not adjust itself for human difficulty. "I do not forgive you," Elowen said. "I want you to understand that clearly. I am not in a position to forgive you today, and I will not perform forgiveness because it is expected." "I do not expect it," Alistair said. "Good," she said. She looked at him. He looked at her. For the first time in 61 years, the Duke of Ravenshurst had no structure to stand behind, no authority, no precision, no carefully managed distance between himself and the consequence of his own choices. He simply sat in his chair and was looked at by his daughter and had nothing to offer except the truth he had already given. It was not enough. He knew it was not enough. He did not pretend otherwise. "What do you want to do?" he said. Elowen looked at him for a moment. "I want time," she said. "I am not leaving. I am not making any decision today. I want time to understand what this is before I decide what it means." "That is reasonable," he said. She stood. She smoothed her dress. She looked at the portrait on the shelf. Her mother's face, his younger face, crispin between them in an English summer 30 years ago before any of this had happened yet. She looked back at the Duke. She was a remarkable woman, Elowen said, in case you wanted to know. She walked out of the study. Alistair sat alone for a very long time. Something had changed, not resolved, not healed, not any of the clean things that stories sometimes promise, simply changed. The lie of 30 years had been replaced by the truth, and the truth was harder and more real, and the only thing either of them had left to build anything from. Ravenshurst was still vast, still immaculate, still silent, but the silence felt different now. It felt like something that was waiting, rather than something that had simply given up. Elowen stayed. She went back to her duties the following morning with the quiet efficiency she always brought to them, and said nothing to anyone, and performed nothing for anyone, and simply continued. The staff noticed something was different between her and the Duke without being able to identify what. There were no dramatic incidents, no visible signs of the conversation that had taken place in the study. Simply a quality in the air between them that had not been there before. A different kind of attention, a different kind of silence when they were in the same room. Alistair found himself doing something he had not done in a very long time. Adjusting. He had lived at Ravenhurst for 40 years and had never adjusted to anything, because Ravenhurst adjusted to him. He was the Duke. Everything moved in relation to him. The household, the staff, the county, his own carefully managed interior life. He began to notice small things about Elowen. The way she organized the library when she cleaned it, not just dusting, but actually reorganizing in a way that made logical sense, that his previous housekeeper had never thought to do. The specific efficiency of how she managed the kitchen supplies, reducing waste in a way he observed in the accounts without having directed it. The way she spoke to the younger staff members, not with the authority of a senior position, but with the directness of someone who has been doing this work for a long time and respects the work regardless of its station. He began leaving books in the library that he thought she might find interesting. He did not acknowledge doing this. She did not acknowledge finding them. But they disappeared from the shelves and came back days later exactly replaced, with a specific care that told him they had been read. On a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after the conversation in the study, Crispin found Alistair in the corridor outside the library and stopped. "You are hovering," Crispin said. "I am not hovering," Alistair said. "You have walked past that door 4 times in the past 20 minutes, Crispin said. That is hovering." Alistair looked at him. "She knows," he said. Crispin was quiet for a moment. "How?" "You," Alistair said. Crispin had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I did not know she was—" "I know," Alistair said. "How is she?" Alistair looked at the library door. "She is remarkable," he said. "She is entirely her mother's daughter, and I mean that as the most significant thing I have said in 30 years. Crispin looked at his old friend, at the man he had known since they were boys at Ravenhurst, at the 61 years of precision and restraint, and the particular loneliness of a man who had built everything and protected himself from everything, and ended up inside his own perfection like a room with no door. "What are you going to do?" Crispin said. "Something I should have done 30 years ago," Alistair said. He walked to the library door. He knocked. Elowen looked up from the shelves when he came in. She waited. He stood in the doorway of the library of Ravenhurst with his hands behind his back, and the particular difficulty of a man who knows what he wants to say and has not yet located the words for it. "I want to make a formal change to your position," he said finally. She looked at him. "You will not remain in this house as a servant. You are my daughter. You will stand where you should have stood from the beginning." He told her what he was offering: education, a formal role in the estate affairs, involvement in the management of Ravenhurst, eventually inheritance. Not as compensation, he was careful to say, not as payment for a debt he understood could not be paid, as acknowledgment of what she was, of what she had always been, of what he had chosen not to know for 30 years. Elowen listened to all of it. Then she said, "I need time." "Of course," he said. She looked at him. "I am not saying no. I am saying I need to think about what it means to say yes." He nodded. He left the library. She stood at the shelves and looked at the books he had been leaving for her. She took one down, opened it, read the first page. She put it under her arm. She went to her room. She sat at the small desk in her room and thought for a very long time. She had come to Ravenhurst as a servant. She had found her father. She had told him the truth and heard his. She had been offered something she had not been offered before. Not luxury, not position, acknowledgement. The simple, irreversible acknowledgement of what she was. She thought about her mother, about what Seraphine would have said. She thought she knew. She came back 3 days later, not as a maid, as herself, and she said yes. She came back on a Sunday morning. She walked through the gates of Ravenhurst in the same coat she had worn on the Monday morning she arrived, and she walked up the same drive and through the same door and into the same entrance hall. Everything was the same, and nothing was the same. Alistair was in the entrance hall. He had not arranged to be there. He had simply been there when she came through the door in the particular way of a man who had been finding reasons to be near a door without admitting it to himself. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I accept," she said. He nodded once. "Good," he said. Neither of them performed the moment. There was no embrace, no dramatic declaration, no rushing together across a marble floor. They were too alike for that, both of them having spent their lives managing large feelings through composure, and neither of them ready to abandon that composure entirely simply because the situation warranted it. But something happened in that entrance hall that was real. The particular quality of two people who have arrived at an understanding, settling into the space between them. Not warmth yet, not the easy warmth of people who have known each other long enough. Something earlier than warmth, the beginning of it. The acknowledgement of what they were to each other. The weeks that followed were not simple. Real things are not simple. There were days when the distance between them felt insurmountable, when Alistair's precision and control made conversation feel like navigating a house with no soft surfaces, when the 30 years of his absence sat in the room with them and could not be ignored. There were days when Elowen did not want to be in the same room with him at all. When she went to her new rooms in the East Wing and sat at the desk and thought about her mother and felt the particular complicated feeling of being given something she had always wanted by the person whose choice had ensured she never had it. She felt both things. She did not pretend otherwise. Alistair stopped pretending too. This was the most significant change at Ravenhurst, not the formal adjustment to Elowen's position, not the gradual introduction of her to the estate affairs, not even the specific morning in November when he showed her the letter Seraphine had written and watched her read her mother's words in her mother's handwriting. The most significant change was simply that Alistair Vane stopped performing certainty. He began to say, quietly, without drama, when he did not know something, when he had been wrong, when he was uncertain about how to proceed. The staff noticed. They did not comment, but they noticed. Crispin noticed. "You are different," Crispin said, on a visit in December. "Yes," Alistair said. "Is it better?" Alistair thought about this for a moment. "It is more honest," he said. "I think that is the same thing." On a December evening, Elowen came to find Alistair in the study. She came without knocking, which was new. She stood in the doorway with a ledger from the estate accounts in her hand and an expression that meant she had found something and had an opinion about it. She sat across from his desk and showed him what she had found, an inefficiency in the management of the northern boundary properties that had been quietly losing money for several years and that his estate manager had apparently not caught. Alistair looked at the figures. Then he looked at her. "How did you find this?" "I read everything," she said, simply. "All of it, from the beginning." He looked at the figures again. "Your mother used to do that. Read everything from the beginning. She said you could not understand where something was if you did not know where it started." Elowen looked at him. "She said that to me too," she said quietly. Something passed between them in the firelit study. Not resolution, not the clean ending of 30 years of absence and consequence, simply a moment, small and specific and real. Two people who were learning, slowly, imperfectly, with difficulty, what they were to each other. "I will speak to the estate manager in the morning," Alistair said. "I already drafted a letter," Elowen said. She put it on the desk. He read it. It was exactly right. He looked up at his daughter. "Your mother's mind." "And apparently yours," she said. She stood and took the ledger and walked out of the study. Alistair sat at his desk for a long time afterward. Ravenhurst was quiet around him, but it was a different quiet now. Not the silence of a house that has given up on warmth. The silence of a house that is waiting to find out what comes next.
Forgiveness did not arrive on a specific day. It did not announce itself. It came the way real things come, gradually, quietly, in the accumulation of ordinary moments that individually mean little and together mean everything. A letter read by firelight, a ledger on a desk, a book left on a shelf and taken down and read and replaced with care. Alistair Vane had spent 61 years building Ravenhurst into something perfect. He had not understood that perfect and whole were not the same thing. He understood now. Elowen did not stop grieving her mother. She was not supposed to. Seraphine Vale had been remarkable, and remarkable people deserve to be grieved properly and for as long as necessary. But she found, slowly, on her own terms, that grief and living were not opposites, that you could carry one and still do the other, that her mother had known this and had lived it every day of the life she had built alone. Elowen had inherited that, among other things. Crispin Darlow continued to visit Ravenhurst with the cheerful frequency of a man who considers himself entirely responsible for a good outcome he stumbled into accidentally. Nobody corrected him. Ravenhurst changed, not dramatically, not all at once, in the particular way that houses change when the people inside them decide to stop performing and start living. The silence that had defined it for 30 years was still there, but it was softer now, full of something it had not held before. A father who had finally stopped running, a daughter who had chosen not to. And between them, fragile and real and built on truth rather than pretense, something that had not existed at Ravenhurst in a very long time. A beginning. If Elowen's story moved you, if that study scene took your breath away, if this is the kind of storytelling you have been looking for, drop a comment right now. Tell us where you are watching from. What time is it where you are? London? New York? Lagos? Toronto? Accra? Sydney? We want to know how far this story has traveled. If this is your first time here, welcome home. Hit subscribe now. New stories every week, only on Duke and Duchess. Share this today with someone who needs to hear it, because some stories are not just stories. They are reminders that truth, however late it arrives, always arrives. We will see you for the next one. It is already waiting.